back again. I apparently ruffled a few feathers in my last video on Trump's plan. I'm not going to apologize for what I said, because it is my opinion on the matter. There's been a few developments. Some of this is old news, some of it not so old. The first thing is, it wasn't just one sheriff's deputy found hiding behind the car. It was 4. So that's the old news. The more current news is there was a teacher in Douglas County, Georgia, who apparently snapped and barricaded himself in his classroom with a gun, and when the principal went in, started popping off shots at him. I'm not saying that would be the norm, but what I am saying is it takes a certain, like I said, it takes a certain mindset to be able to handle, yourself and keep calm with a gun like that in an active shooting environment. And I don't know, it's pushing it as is with your regular concealed carry permits, and I do have one. But there's no doubt in my mind they're going to need something a little bit more in depth, and if you're going to be in a security, and it is, in this case, they're going to be operating as security. These teachers would be if they're armed. And I don't think it's too unreasonable to say maybe they need to have prior law enforcement or military experience. And there are educators out there like that. I would have had no issue with my high school principal and primary vice principal, because the principal was a retired Marine and the vice principal was a retired Navy SEAL. So I would have no issue with them if they had been playing that role, because I heard stories. The vice principal had a heart attack my senior year, and luckily he survived, because he was actually one of my favorite administrators I ever had. And they said the principal was there, and he, like I said, he was a retired Marine, and they said when he saw it happen or saw him in the hospital and saw the lesions from chemical burns and stuff all over his body and crap, if he can handle stuff like that, I'm pretty sure he could handle pretty much anything. But I don't, and of course I haven't gotten to see, why'd you get over like that? I haven't gotten to see what the motive was on that teacher situation in Douglas, Georgia. So I don't know what happened there, what triggered it. But ultimately, any plan at this point, I could not support. For the simple fact of the matter is, have we bothered? It's kind of like after 9/11, we're like, we got to get these Islamic terrorists. Al-Qaeda. We never identified what exactly Islamic terrorism is, what triggers it, and the best way to combat it. We just kind of threw the boots in the ground, bombs in the air, and that's kind of what we're doing here. It's like an analogy that I used. And this was a few months back, the analogy of you're not feeling good, you have a headache, upset stomach, you go to the doctor, find out you have cancer, and they decide to prescribe you something for your headache and something for your upset stomach, and you're like, okay, well, I have cancer, is this going to treat it? Oh, you'll feel better, I promise. Okay, so you treated the symptoms, but you still have the cancer. It's still going to kill you. And it could be something easily treatable or require more in-depth work. But instead of going for the root cause and treating it, you're treating the symptoms. And that's what's happening. That's why I cannot support any plan at this point, because we have not identified the root cause for the seemingly uptick in violence. And we haven't, as a result, we haven't actually tried to deal with the problem. We're trying to deal with the symptoms by regulating and everything else. I stand by that premise. And until we do ask that question and come up with some viable answers to a root cause and something that could seem even remotely serve as a means to rectify that root cause, I cannot support it. I just can't. I have to have that information. I have to know that we're actually going to attack the problem and not the symptoms of the problem. And I know there's more to it than just that. And they bowed up and stopped for nothing. There's another symptom that has not been looked at, and that is, you look at the protests that's going on in the name of peace, and which they're violent acts. Friday of the last week, today is February 28th, it's Wednesday. Friday, this past Friday, an article was posted where a bunch of school kids just walked out of class to protest violence. And what was their way of protesting the violence? They proceeded to vandalize personal property and assault people, and several of them were arrested for vandalism and assault. So your way of getting your point across that you're against violence is to use violence. And this is not an isolated occurrence. We've seen this with the calls against police brutality. You know, cities destroyed in the name of peace. It's kind of like when they call for equality, but, you know, the people calling for racial or sexual equality or even racial equality, and they're making these posts saying, demonizing the white males and everything else. And I've seen them, you've seen them, we've all seen them on social media. The fact of the matter is, if you want equality, you have to push for equality. If you want peace, you have to push for peace. If you want an end to violence, you have to find a nonviolent way to push for violence, because if you don't, any violence you're going to inflict on someone is going to result in more violence. So I'm not looking at these violent protests as the problem. I'm not looking at gun shooting or, you know, mass shootings even as a problem. They're the symptom of a problem in my mind. And until we take the time to actually address the problem, there's no use in me supporting anything, because if we don't even know haven't even identified the problem, how can we say we're going to fix it? And so, yeah, I'll stick by what I said. And I know that I'm going to blast Trump, because he mentioned something a while back about not going for feel-good politics. He was not behind it whatsoever. And this is feel-good politics. Feel-good legislation, if you will. And it was wrong when when it happened under the Obama administration. It's a wrong under Bush. There's more to politics, there's more to life than just trying to make everyone happy and feel good, especially even in an election year. And right now, that's all this is to make the key demographics feel good, and so that they'll turn out in November and vote for them. That's all it is. And if you don't think Trump is at least learning to play that game, you're wrong, because if you think he's going to take the political establishment and make them play by his rules, no. Every single time someone's tried that, it has not ended well for them. You either play by their rules, or you wind up like JFK. And he did not necessarily want to play by their rules, and he made a lot of people angry for that. And if you don't, there's a lot of people with a lot of power that are pissed that simply because Trump won and Hillary didn't. So, if you don't think he's learning to play the game, if for no other reason, self-perseverance, I'm sorry, but I promise you he is. And maybe he may not be playing it like, at this point, Obama did in his first, this far into his first term. I don't know. But I can assure you, he's playing the game. Whether he'll win the game or not is a different question. And I stand by that. Because that's literally the only way you can survive in politics. You have to be willing to play their game. You've got to be willing to play dirty. It's like my late grandmother said. She told a former governor where I'm from. She knew him personally for decades. And she went to his campaign, shook his hand and said, I think a lot of you, I've always thought you to be a upstanding guy. But the problem is, if you get into politics and you're there anytime, you're going to come out corrupt. And he assured her, oh, no, I will not. I will be just as clean and honest as I was right here, right now. And she said, well, I hope you're right. But I don't believe it. By the time he was out of politics, he was being investigated. There was like scandals galore coming out. It was like every day something new was hitting the news. And Trump might have had the best of intentions. He might not have had any ulterior motives whatsoever. And he may have walked in there full intentions, not going to play their games. He was going to make them bow down and play by his rules. But I don't think that's going to be the case. I think he's having to do it, or else. He's got too many people on him right now, and the only way he's going to get them off his back and off of even his own son's back is if he plays ball. And that's what I honestly do feel. So let me know what you think about it. That's my 2 cents on it. Like I said, I don't apologize for saying the plan is a bunch of crap. If for no other reason it's crap, because it doesn't actually look into the problem, the root cause. It just tries to address a symptom. Like I said, let me know what you think. Later.